I've just come back from Los Angeles. I was down there to meet with a group of rather important people in the movie industry, scientists and so on, who were considering calling a congress of the best minds in the world to meet in Los Angeles in the near future, to be a kind of planetary alarm conference. They wanted scientists and statesmen, religious leaders, and to do something to impress upon the world through all the media that we are in very serious danger of destroying the biosphere, that is to say, the whole envelope of living creatures which covers this planet, through pollution, overpopulation, nuclear fallout, poisoning of our food, and very lack of food. And we met to discuss the problem of organizing this conference, and here were all these brilliant people. And it came over us that we really didn't know what we ought to say. I mean, you can scream and create a state of panic, but that won't do any good. And when it came down to it, we didn't know what we ought to say because we really don't know what to do. Some things that we might do, for example, to increase the food supply with high-yield crops, may be ecological mistakes. And so the consensus of almost everybody at the meeting was that in some way or other, the human race has to learn how to leave the world alone and let what is called the natural homeostasis, that is the self-balancing process of nature, take care of the mess. Now, how are we going to do that? This is Japanese ceremonial tea. It's good on a cold day. See, our problem is we don't really know how to stop. We've got something started and we see it's going in a wrong direction. And I think the difficulty is, to borrow an old Chinese saying, that when the wrong man uses the right means work in the wrong way. In other words, there's something wrong with the way we think. And while that is there, everything we do will be a mess. Now, what is it that's wrong?
Distinction occurring between sort of a living, vibrant Earth, which we participate in psychically, spiritually, and totally, and the Earth as a resource. And I wonder if that occurs in the transition from pantheism, paganism, to monotheism, which where the sort of sacred endowment of plants, animals, etc., becomes. These things are, as you say, instrumental. Yeah. Do you think that's a significant shift?
I think it's both a cause of this shift and a symptom of the shift. But the more distanced we are from nature, the more it seems that God is not in nature, but is kind of the external overseer of nature. And actual beings of nature lose their beingness. A lot of the things that we blame as cause are actually symptom.
How do you mean? What do you mean by that?
I mean, I'm seeing it a lot in climate change and environmentalism now. I hope it's okay to keep referring back to that because my mind is kind of in that space, but that, for example, one of the most alarming things happening is what I'm calling the insect holocaust. Have you noticed that there's less bug splatter on the window than when you were a kid?
Yeah, loads less. There used to be a good covering of splatter, right. Like a nice sort of Steven Spielberg sky of splatter.
Yeah. It's not your imagination. Like, there's been approximately a 75% loss of flying insect biomass over 30 years. So confronted with anything like that, or forest fires or hurricanes, this mindset of fundamentalism, of money, of war, has us jump, excuse me.
Have some water from this little beaker.
Thank you. It has us jump to the cause. What's the cause? Oh, insect die-off, it must be climate change. Forest fires, it must be climate change. To find an enemy is one of the deep programs of our culture. To solve a problem, so my son, who's 5, got this book from the library about superheroes. and it has all these little anecdotes about the Avengers or something like that. And each story in there, the template was the same. A bad thing is happening, the cause is a bad guy, and the solution is to defeat the bad guy by force. So this is an example of a reductionism that also has us reduce the living complexity of Earth to a single cause, which is why I'm wary of putting all of the environmental eggs into the basket of climate change and saying if we only solve this one thing, then everything else will be fine. And then what do we not see?
Concern with the CO2 is not kind of where we are today, or even the current rate of carbon generation, but really if carbon generation keeps accelerating and we keep getting that increase in the Keeling curve, the CO2 parts per million in the atmosphere, and if we keep going and if we're complacent, then I think we could. There's some risk of sort of non-linear climate change. So this has to end up with renewable, sustainable energy. It's tautological. It's really just a question of, do we try to get there sooner or later? And we should try to get there sooner. It's obvious. Why run the? How long do you want to run this experiment?
Yeah, it's also true that even if we stopped CO2 production, that's probably still not enough, that we do need mechanisms for extraction of CO2 from the atmosphere and the oceans.
I think if we stopped CO2 production today, which obviously we could not do without civilization coming to a grinding halt, and mass starvation and all sorts of terrible things happening. So we could not stop CO2 generation today, but I think at the sort of 400, possibly even 500 ppm level, I think it's probably okay. But if as the world industrializes, and sort of at 8 billion people, get to 9 billion people, have a lot more industrial output per person, you could see at what might be okay at sort of 400 or 500 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere might become quite dire at 1,000.
Yep.
And the trend is certainly in that direction if we don't do anything about it. So